The emergency department of St. Michael's in Norfolk moved with the rhythm of controlled chaos, fluorescent lights humming overhead like the electrical pulse of something alive, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax layering the air in a way that never quite masked the metallic undertone of blood. Brooke Sullivan pushed through the double doors at 6:51 a.m., her sneakers silent on cold linoleum as nurses exchanged handoff reports and monitors beeped their steady mechanical mantras. She'd walked these corridors for 8 years without anyone asking questions, and that was precisely how she needed it. Her scrubs were navy blue, standard issue, unremarkable. The kind of uniform designed to make you invisible. She moved through the ER with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd seen worse than most could imagine, checking vitals on post-op patients with hands that never trembled even when alarms screamed overhead. A woman in bed 3 clutched her chest. Brooke was there before the monitor registered the spike, adjusting the morphine drip with the practiced precision of someone who'd administered field surgery under direct enemy fire. The woman's breathing steadied. Brooke murmured something soft, something reassuring, and moved to the next patient without waiting for gratitude. She pulled open her locker at 7:15 a.m., the metal door hinging with a sound like a crypt opening. Her jacket hung inside, worn at the elbows, the leather cracked from years of use. Most people would have retired it years ago. Brooke kept it because retirement meant letting go, and she wasn't good at letting go. Her fingers unconsciously traced something sewn into the lining, a faded unit patch, so worn the colors had nearly bled into uniformity. The motto was still legible if you knew where to look: first in, last out. 8 years since Tikrit. 8 years since Captain Brooke Sullivan had ceased to officially exist, her military record scrubbed, her service erased, her name buried under layers of classified paperwork that had the weight of a state secret. Now she was just a nurse. Just Brooke. Just someone who moved through hallways and healed the broken and never, ever drew attention. She pulled on the jacket and headed back into the ward. The new admission came through at 7:42 a.m. Male, 34 years old, unconscious from a training accident at Naval Station Norfolk. The paramedics wheeled him past the nursing station with the clipped efficiency of people who'd transported 1,000 critical patients, calling out vitals in the cadence of a practiced liturgy. Brooke heard the name and felt nothing. Marcus Chen. The name meant nothing to her anymore. 8 years was enough time to bury a lifetime. Bed 7 was hers to prep. She hung his for fluids with methodical care, adjusted his oxygen saturation monitor, checked the placement of his catheter. His chart indicated a closed head injury, possible internal bleeding, the kind of admission that meant hours of waiting to see if his body would cooperate with survival. Brooke had seen worse odds. She'd carried worse odds through 3 miles of enemy fire in Tikrit, 2007, a SEAL named Marcus with her call sign tattooed on his left arm in block letters because that's what you did when someone had carried your body through hell and lived to tell about it. She glanced at his left arm. The tattoo was still there. Valkyrie in block capitals, the ink faded but unmistakable, the kind of memorial that didn't fade even when 8 years tried their best to make everything else disappear. Brooke's expression didn't change. Her jaw didn't clench. Her breath remained steady. She checked his pupil response with the small penlight she kept in her pocket, noted the results on his chart, and moved to the next patient without pause. The skill of invisibility was compartmentalization. The skill of survival was never showing what you were processing. Pain is data. Shock is a luxury. She'd learned that lesson when she was 26 years old and carrying a Navy SEAL through Tikrit while his blood soaked through her combat fatigues and his unit called her Valkyrie because she was the one deciding who lived and who didn't. That was a different lifetime. That was a different person. Dr. Harrison Pierce entered the ward at 8:03 a.m., his white coat immaculate, his shoulders positioned with the careful geometry of a man who'd never carried anything heavier than a stethoscope and an ego. He was 42, son of a surgeon, grandson of a surgeon, educated at institutions that had names that required explanation to people who hadn't grown up with trust funds and legacy admissions. His watch cost more than Brooke made in a month. His shoes probably cost more than her monthly car payment. He moved through the emergency department like he was inspecting property he owned, his eyes cataloging inefficiencies, his expression permanently set to a smile that never reached the part of him that was capable of joy. He saw Brooke checking vitals on the new admission, the seal in bed 7, and something in his expression hardened. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to recognition. She was adjusting the bag with the casual precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Her hands moved with the economy of motion that came from thousands of hours of practice, from muscle memory that went deeper than any diploma. The patient's anxiety was visible in his vital signs, the slight elevation in blood pressure, the rapid shallow breathing. Brooke murmured something to him, low and steady, and Brooke watched his entire body relax. Just like that. The kind of command that came from absolute certainty. The kind of authority that couldn't be learned in medical school. Dr. Pierce's jaw clenched for exactly one beat. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd just identified his problem. And from that smile, Brooke, had she been watching him instead of checking the patient's sclera for icterus, would have recognized the moment a predator commits to the hunt. But Brooke wasn't watching. She was already moving to the next patient. She was already disappearing back into the machinery of the emergency department, becoming one more set of hands, one more person in scrubs, one more nurse with no medical school pedigree, no prestigious credentials, no right to the quiet respect that patient seemed to give her without question. Dr. Pierce stood at the nursing station for exactly 4 minutes. He reviewed charts, asked questions about the seal in bed 7, listened while the night shift nurse, Jennifer, 30 years experience, the kind of nurse who could read a patient's eyes and know whether they needed medication or just human contact, explained that the patient was stable but they were watching his ICP. Increased intracranial pressure. The kind of thing that could kill you quietly if you weren't vigilant about it. And the nurse assigned to him. Pierce asked. Brooke. She's been here since 6:45. He nodded. He'd already catalogued her performance. The efficiency. The respect from the patients. The kind of composure that came from somewhere deeper than any certification board could certify. She checked vitals like she was reading scripture. She moved between patients like she was conducting surgery. She commanded a presence that made people trust her automatically, implicitly, the kind of trust that took most doctors years of credentials and reputation to earn. And she had neither. Just a high school diploma and some certification that she'd earned 8 years ago, the paper trail so carefully constructed by people with federal access codes that it was essentially forensically flawless. No medical school. No residency. No board certification. Just a nurse named Brooke Sullivan who moved through the ER like she'd spent her entire life doing exactly this. Dr. Pierce closed the chart and started walking toward bed 7. Behind him, the monitor in bed 3 beeped softly, a patient awakening, someone's heart stabilizing, someone's oxygen saturation climbing back toward normal. The kind of quiet victory that happened 40 times a day in emergency departments across the country. The kind of victory that required no audience, no applause, no recognition. Just the hands of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Brooke was adjusting Marcus Chen's blanket when Dr. Pierce arrived. His eyes were still closed, his breathing still shallow and automatic. She'd already checked his neurostatus 3 times in the past hour, pupils equal and reactive, movement present in all extremities, the kind of baseline data that would matter if his intracranial pressure started climbing. She worked with the concentration of someone performing microsurgery, and in a way, she was. Every adjustment had consequence. Every detail was data. Every moment mattered. How long has he been stable? Dr. Pierce asked. She turned. Her eyes met his for exactly 1 second before dropping back to her work. 72 minutes. Vitals have been consistent. No sign of deterioration. He was watching her hands. The way they moved with absolute certainty. The way she touched the patient with the combination of care and clinical detachment that came from having made life and death decisions before most people had finished residency. The way her voice carried the kind of authority that typically required at least 10 years of medical education. When's the CT? He asked. 40 minutes, Brooke said. She was already checking the monitor again, her eye scanning the numbers with the efficiency of a polygraph operator reading a lie detector. Heart rate stable. Blood pressure holding. Oxygen saturation in the 94th percentile. We need to keep him NPO pending the head trauma protocol. Nothing to eat. Nothing to drink. Standard care for a patient with possible internal injuries. Textbook nursing. The kind of decision that required no credentials, just competence. Just the kind of person who'd seen 100 combat injuries and knew the protocols because those protocols were the difference between recovery and complications. Dr. Pierce left bed 7 at 8:31 a.m. He didn't say anything else. He just watched her for a moment longer, the way a chess player watches a board after the opponent has moved a piece in a direction he hadn't anticipated. Then he turned and walked back toward his office. Behind him, Brooke continued her work without acknowledgement. Her hands remained steady. Her expression remained unchanged. Marcus Chen slept on in his hospital bed, his tattoo exposed to the fluorescent lights, his connection to Captain Brooke Sullivan residing in 8 years of forgetting and 1 moment of recognition that had already passed into history. She had a patient to monitor. She had data to track. She had the kind of work that required absolute focus and the kind of composure that came from having already survived the worst thing that could happen to a human being. And she had no idea that Dr. Pierce was currently sitting at his desk, his fingers steepled in front of his face, running through his mind a list of grievances that had just hardened into something resembling a plan. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. During grand rounds that morning, the conference room at St. Michael's filled with 12 staff members and 4 medical students crowding the space like spectators at an execution. Dr. Pierce stood at the head of the mahogany table, remote control in hand, projecting patient charts onto the wall screen. Brooke stood at the back, arms crossed, watching the fluorescent lights hum overhead. When her name appeared on the 3rd chart, Pierce smiled. This is what happens when we allow vocational nurses to pretend they understand complex pathophysiology, he announced, his voice carrying the smooth arrogance of a man who'd never been contradicted successfully. Medical students leaned forward, pens poised. Notice the dangerously outdated protocols. Field assessment instead of laboratory values. No appreciation for evidence-based medicine. Just gut instinct and shortcuts. He tapped the screen. Brooke's handwritten notes enlarged, patient presenting with diminished breath sounds bilaterally, possible pneumothorax, recommend immediate chest X-ray and interventional readiness. Standard assessment. Correct assessment. Pierce painted it like negligence. This is the ceiling for anyone without formal medical training, he continued, turning to make eye contact with each student. Remember, experience without credentials is just anecdote pretending to be expertise. The room had the quality of a courtroom during closing arguments. One of the older nurses, Janet from the day shift, suddenly found her coffee cup very interesting. A resident stared at his feet. Brooke took one measured breath. Felt the unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the fabric worn soft from 8 years of touch, the motto embroidered there, first in, last out. She let a single tear escape, watched it track down her cheek, and wiped it away with her thumb without breaking eye contact with Pierce. Then she spoke. When you're done performing, Dr. Pierce, there are actual patients who need care. Her voice came out level, steady, with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse. She turned and walked out before he could respond. The room went dead silent. Pierce's smile faltered for exactly 2 seconds before he recovered, clearing his throat and pivoting to the next chart as if nothing had happened. But his jaw had tightened. Something had shifted. That afternoon, during the 2:02 p.m. shift change when the hallway traffic between nurses' stations peaked, Brooke was alone at the vending machine on the 2nd floor. The hiss of the refrigerator filled the silence. She'd selected a protein bar when Pierce appeared, blocking the exit with his body position to keep her trapped in the alcove. 3 nurses restocking the med cart 40 feet away could hear every word. 2 orderlies passing with a stretcher slowed their pace without breaking stride. Pierce selected a protein bar himself, moving with deliberate slowness. "You know, Nurse Bedpan," he began, his voice pitched loud enough to carry, "I've been reviewing your file. 2-year nursing degree. No medical school. No research publications. No formal trauma training whatsoever. He turned to face her directly. Just an inexplicable delusion that you belong anywhere near critical decisions. Brooke stood motionless, her hands at her sides. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Security could escort you out anytime I file the right paperwork, Pierce continued, extracting his protein bar with ceremonial precision. Consider it mercy that I haven't terminated you yet. He smiled, the smile of a predator certain of its power. Brooke took one measured breath. Let the words settle like sediment. Then she replied, is that before or after you explained to the board why your ICU has twice the infection rate of mine? Pierce's jaw tightened. His protein bar stopped halfway to his mouth. She had him, not with anger, but with data. With facts he couldn't dismiss as anecdote. She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his arm, and returned to work. As the orderlies resumed normal speed and the nurses at the med cart exchanged glances, Pierce stood alone at the vending machine, holding his protein bar like a weapon that had suddenly become useless. The next morning, Brooke emerged from the supply closet with clean linen stacked in her arms. Pierce was waiting. The morning shift had just arrived, 8 nurses, 3 residents, and a medical student clustered near the nursing station 30 feet away, well within earshot. Perfect positioning. I'm recommending you be restricted to bedpan duty and vitals only, Pierce announced, his voice loud enough to carry. No medication administration. No clinical assessments. Nothing requiring actual medical judgment. He stepped closer, invading her space in that way that made clear this was theater. It's mercy, really. Saves you from opportunities to hurt someone. Brooke stood motionless, the linen still cradled in her arms. Her spine remained straight. Her hands remained steady. She let the words land, let them settle, then she felt something shift in her chest, not fear, not anger, but clarity. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are beneath the camouflage of scrubs. One tear tracked down her face. She wiped it with her thumb. Maintained eye contact. Spoke in a voice so quiet the nurses at the station had to strain to hear it. Your ego isn't a medical emergency, doctor, but my patients are. She stepped past him, not around him, through his space, and answered a call light that was probably his imagination. But it wasn't. Bed 7 needed pain management. She moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who'd operated under fire, steady hands that had held lives together across 3 tours and counting. The monitors beeped their mechanical rhythm as she worked. Marcus Chen lay unconscious, his breathing easy, his vitals stable. For now. The shift change bells chimed at 3:15. Fluorescent lights hummed their endless drone above the ER as new staff filtered in, old staff peeling off their badges like snakes shedding skin. Brooke moved through the corridor with the same invisible efficiency she'd maintained for 8 years, present but unremarkable, competent but unnoticed. She had learned long ago that staying invisible meant staying employed. She returned to bed 7 because no one else would. That was how the system worked in teaching hospitals. The nurses did the rounds. The doctors took the glory. The residents took the credit. And the patients got whatever was left. Marcus Chen lay exactly as she'd left him 40 minutes earlier during the last set of vitals, his breathing easy, his color good. She pulled up his chart on the monitor mounted beside his head and ran through the numbers with the automatic precision of someone who'd checked thousands of patients. Blood pressure 128/74. Heart rate 86. Oxygen saturation 98% on full liters of nasal cannula. Everything stable. Everything normal. She placed the pulse oximeter on his left index finger and waited for the reading to populate. 98% again. Good. She reached for the blood pressure cuff, the vinyl cool against her palm as she wrapped it around his right arm and waited for the automatic cycle to complete. The machine hissed softly, the sound like air escaping from a pressurized chamber. 120/72. She watched the numbers cycle through again. 119/71. 118/70. The downward trend was subtle, The kind of thing a distracted resident might miss during rounds, the kind of thing that looked like normal variation if you weren't paying close enough attention. But Brooke paid attention to everything. She had learned early in Tikrit that the small things killed you first. The slight fever that meant infection. The shallow breathing that meant collapse. The dropping pressure that meant the body was shutting down. She checked the heart rate monitor next. 86 had become 90. 90 became 94. The rhythm remained regular, steady, but faster, her body compensating for something she couldn't yet see. She leaned closer to listen to his lung sounds, the stethoscope earpieces warm against her ears as she placed the diaphragm on his left anterior chest. Clear. No crackles, no wheezes. She moved to the right side. Clear there too. His abdomen was soft and non-distended. No obvious bleeding, no obvious trauma. But something was wrong. The oxygen saturation was still 98%, yet his breathing had become slightly more labored, his rib cage rising a fraction higher with each breath, his nostrils flaring in a way they hadn't before. He was working harder to move the same amount of air. The body didn't work harder unless something was forcing it to compensate. Unless something was preventing the heart from filling properly. Unless something was creating pressure around the heart. Cardiac tamponade. The word formed in her mind with the certainty of muscle memory. Blood or fluid accumulating in the pericardial sac, compressing the heart, preventing the ventricles from expanding and filling with blood. A life-threatening condition that could turn stable into dead in minutes. Standard ER protocol called for an echocardiogram followed by a possible pericardiocentesis if confirmed, a needle insertion into the pericardial sac to drain fluid. But those procedures took time. And the body took none. She checked the blood pressure again. 115/68. The pulse climbed to 98. His oxygen saturation finally began to drop, 97% now, inching downward like the hand of a clock counting down to something catastrophic. She should have reported this to the resident. She should have alerted Dr. Pierce. She should have followed the chain of command and let the system work the way it was designed to work, through proper channels and proper protocols and proper hierarchy. But Brooke had learned in Tikrit that systems designed by people who'd never held someone's hand as they died were systems that killed people. She was checking his neck veins when the monitors erupted. The heart monitor flatlined. The alarm shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, like something breaking at the molecular level. Marcus's back arched once, his entire body seized, and then he went absolutely still. His pupils dilated. His skin went grey. The sophisticated machinery of a living person simply switched off. Code blue, bed 7, someone shouted. Brooke was already moving. She was already pulling the stretcher away from the wall, already wheeling him toward the hallway because transport during code was protocol, the ER resuscitation bay was 2 minutes away, the equipment there more comprehensive, the space larger. The code team would meet them en route. Except the code team was in the West Wing, the distance to bed 7 measured in minutes they didn't have. The hallway filled instantly. A resident appeared. 2 nurses. A respiratory therapist pushing the crash cart with hands moving on autopilot, muscle memory the only thing keeping chaos at bay. The stretcher wheel squeaked against the floor in a rhythm that sounded like screaming. Fluorescent lights blurred overhead. The smell of antiseptic and latex and fear filled the narrow corridor between bed 7 and the cardiac bay. Brooke's hand found the pulse at Marcus's neck. Nothing. No carotid pulse. No femoral pulse in his groin. 30 seconds had passed. The brain was already dying. Brain death began at 4 minutes without oxygen. They had maybe 300 more seconds before those 300 seconds meant nothing. She grabbed the crash cart and yanked the defibrillator pads from their packet, her hands moving with the speed of someone who'd done this before. She tore Marcus's gown open, the fabric giving with a soft rip, and placed the pads on his chest, one below the right collarbone, one on the left side at the mid-axillary line. The machine charged with a high-pitched whine. "Everyone clear," she said. The body convulsed as the electricity ran through it. The monitor showed asystole, no activity, nothing but a flat line and the sound of a machine reading the absence of life. She squeezed the ambu bag, forcing oxygen into his lungs. 5 compressions, 1 breath, 5 compressions, 1 breath. The rhythm drilled into her muscles so deeply that her hands knew the count without her mind having to think it. 30 seconds without a heartbeat. The body was a battery running down. "Where's the code team?" someone asked, their voice high and thin. 2 minutes out, another voice answered. 2 minutes. 120 seconds. That was 2 minutes of her hands inside his chest cavity, 2 minutes of watching him die in degrees. She could see it happening in real time, the dilating pupils, the graying skin, the absolute emptiness of presence that came when the body's electrical system shut down and refused to restart. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Dr. Pierce appeared at the edge of the hallway, his face pale, his mouth opening to issue some order, some protocol-based instruction that would accomplish nothing except his own sense of control. He was still talking when Brooke made her decision. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for authorization. She ripped open the airway surgical kit mounted on the crash cart and grabbed the scalpel, the blade catching the overhead lights as she positioned herself over Marcus's chest and located the landmarks by touch alone. 4th intercostal space. Mid-axillary line. The space between the ribs where 100 field surgeries had taught her to cut. "What are you doing?" Pierce's voice cracked. "Stop." "You are not." The scalpel bit through skin with a sensation like cutting through warm silk. Blood welled immediately, dark red in the fluorescent light. She extended the incision horizontally, 6 inches, enough space, and reached for the rib spreaders from the surgical tray. The metal was cold and smooth and familiar in her hands as she positioned them and turned the screw, opening the chest cavity slowly, methodically, with the precision of someone who'd done this in the dark under mortar fire while sand filled her nostrils and the smell of diesel and burning surrounded her. The ribs separated with a soft cracking sound, the sternum spreading like a birdcage opening. Blood pooled in the cavity. She placed her fingers inside his chest and felt the pericardial sac distended like a balloon, swollen with blood and clot, the pressure suffocating the heart itself. "Get me a larger scalpel," she said. Her voice was completely steady. Pierce stood frozen, his face the color of spoiled meat, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides as if his body remembered how to fight but his mind had gone blank. She didn't wait. She grabbed another blade from the kit and incised the pericardium with one sure stroke. Dark blood poured out, a torrent of it, accumulation from the blunt force trauma Marcus had sustained during the training accident that nobody had caught on imaging, that nobody had seen. The pressure released like opening a valve. The heart, freed from its suffocation, suddenly expanded and began beating on its own. The monitor showed rhythm. Sinus rhythm. A regular pattern. A living heartbeat. "Someone page CT surgery for closure," Brooke said, her hand still inside Marcus's chest cavity, holding pressure on the bleeding vessel, her voice the only calm thing in the hallway. "Maintain pressure here. Get me another 2 units typed and crossed. Let's move to the resuscitation bay. Now." The code team rushed past Pierce, the doctors and nurses understanding instantly what had happened, what was required, what came next. The stretcher moved. The monitors moved with it. The 4 lines and chest tubes and pacing pads all moved together in the choreography of controlled chaos. Brooke looked up at Dr. Pierce, standing frozen in the hallway, watching the impossible. Her hands were literally inside another human being's chest cavity, holding his life together with her own competence, and there was nothing in Pierce's world of protocols and hierarchy and bureaucratic power that could explain what he was seeing. "He's stable now," she said. Pierce's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Then he turned and walked directly toward the administrative offices without a word, his shoes clicking against the tile floor with the rhythm of something breaking, something fundamental in the hierarchy of that hospital, in the order he'd fought so hard to maintain, beginning to crack under the weight of what he'd just witnessed. The cardiac surgeons in the OR had 6 minutes to confirm what Brooke already knew. Massive cardiac tamponade. Blood pooling in the pericardial sac, crushing the heart like a fist closing around a bird. They found the laceration to the right ventricle, a 4mm tear that would have been invisible on any standard imaging, would have killed Marcus Chen within minutes if she hadn't heard what the monitors were screaming and acted. The surgical closure took 43 minutes. The surgeons kept glancing at the field thoracotomy she'd initiated, at the precise way she'd accessed the pericardium, at the tourniquet technique that had kept him alive long enough to reach this room. One of them, Dr. Vasquez, 28 years in cardiac surgery, turned to the anesthesiologist and said quietly, "That's combat medicine. That's someone who's done this in the field." Nobody asked questions. Not yet. Dr. Pierce didn't go to the OR observation window. Instead, his shoes clicked down the corridor toward the administrative wing with the sound of a man whose entire foundation had just shifted beneath him. He'd watched Brooke Sullivan move through that hallway like someone operating in a dimension he couldn't access, watched her hands steady themselves without hesitation, watched the other nurses move out of her way as if following some silent chain of command that had nothing to do with hospital hierarchy. His authority, the thing he'd spent 15 years constructing, the careful cultivation of prestige and credentials and the ability to make people feel small, had been rendered irrelevant in the span of 90 seconds. The ER nurses had moved at her direction without question. The residents had stepped back. The attending had watched her work with something approaching reverence in his eyes. He sat at his desk at 3 p.m. with a legal pad and began to build. Not with rage, that was for amateurs. Pierce was a strategist. He filed an incident report citing unauthorized performance of advanced surgical procedures by non-physician personnel. He dug through the Joint Commission regulations and found obscure language about scope of practice violations, about the requirement for physician oversight during surgical intervention. He created a document titled Pattern of Insubordination and listed every interaction he could remember, the vending machine, grand rounds, the way she'd responded to his authority with that infuriating composure. He pulled her personnel file and noted that she had no medical school credentials, no formal surgical training on record, no explanation for how a bedside nurse possessed knowledge that took physicians years of fellowship training to acquire. By 4:38 p.m., he had a binder 3 inches thick. Meticulously organized. Airtight. The hospital board met at 4 p.m. Pierce presented the case with the precision of a prosecutor who'd already won. The incident reports. The regulatory violations. The documentation of her pattern of acting outside her scope of practice. He concluded with the statement that would seal it: either she goes, or I file formal complaints with the state nursing board and our malpractice carrier, and we're looking at suspension of their license, significant financial liability, and potential loss of our accreditation. The choice is straightforward. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, the hospital administrator, a man named Garrett who'd been working in healthcare for 32 years and had learned long ago that legal protection trumped gratitude, made the motion. The vote was unanimous. Security arrived at Brooke Station at 6:04 p.m. The shift had changed an hour prior, and she'd been helping with admissions intake when they approached with the cardboard box already prepared. Nobody made eye contact. She didn't ask questions. She'd known, somehow, the moment Pierce left the hallway. She'd felt the shift in the building's atmosphere like a change in barometric pressure. The walk to the parking lot took 4 minutes. She carried the box with the cracked mug that read "World's Okayest Nurse" on its side, a gift from the pediatric nurses 2 years ago, and the dying succulent that had been on her locker shelf, brown leaves already falling. At the bottom, wrapped in newspaper, was a photograph from Tikrit. Her unit. 8 faces. She counted for that were circled in black marker. Kia. The others had scattered across the country, disappeared into new lives and new identities, connected only by the weight of what they'd witnessed and the silence they'd agreed to carry. The rain started as she walked. By the time she reached the bus stop on Granby Street, the cardboard had softened, the bottom beginning to give way. She stood under the awning of a closed pharmacy, watching the cardboard darken with moisture, watching the last brown leaf from the succulent spin down to the wet concrete. The box was falling apart the same way she wasn't allowed to. That was the agreement. Captain Brooke Sullivan had been erased from every database, every record, every official acknowledgement. When the operation in Tikrit had gone sideways, when the ambush had come from the directions it shouldn't have, when the evacuation had gone wrong, when 4 members of her team had been left behind, the decision had been made at a level she'd never been allowed to access. The truth was classified. Her service was classified. Her existence was classified. She'd been given a social security number, a civilian identity, a name that didn't carry weight or history. She'd been told to disappear, and she had. She pulled her jacket tighter and felt the unit patch sewn into the lining, faded, worn, the color nearly bleached away by 8 years of being hidden. The motto was barely visible, first in, last out. She'd stitched it in herself the night before her discharge from Walter Reed, using thread she'd stolen from occupational therapy. It was the only thing she'd kept that was real. Everything else was a cover. The diploma from a nursing school in Philadelphia. The work history fabricated by people whose names she'd never learned. The apartment in Norfolk under a lease that would terminate whenever the agency decided she'd served her purpose. 16 years of a life that wasn't hers, built so carefully that no one had questioned it, and now it was ending in a cardboard box in the rain. Her phone buzzed at 6:06 p.m. A text from an unknown number, "Ethan's looking for you. Says it's urgent. Your house." She didn't respond. She already knew. He'd been cleaning the attic last week, and there was only one box up there. The showbox she'd hidden in the rafters behind the insulation, the one she'd convinced herself she'd hidden well enough that a 16-year-old boy would never find it. She'd been wrong about many things. She'd been wrong about being able to hide forever. She'd been wrong about being able to live a life that didn't eventually demand the truth. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Marcus Chen was alive because of what she'd done, and now the world was about to discover why a civilian nurse had known how to perform emergency field surgery in a hallway. She took the bus home. Ethan was waiting on the porch, rain-soaked and holding a showbox, and when he saw her face, he didn't ask any questions either. He just said, "There's more to the story, isn't there?" And then the two of them sat in the rain while the cardboard disintegrated and the rest of her carefully constructed life began to come apart at the seams. But at 11 p.m., 5 hours after she'd been escorted out of St. Michael's, when Ethan burst through the main hospital entrance with that showbox and dumped its contents across the administration desk where Dr. Pierce was still smugly filing final termination paperwork, everything changed with the sound of metals hitting polished mahogany. Ethan Sullivan's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he ran through St. Michael's main entrance, 16-year-old legs pumping with purpose, the showbox clutched against his chest like it contained the answer to a question nobody had asked yet. Behind the administration desk, Dr. Pierce was methodically filing the final termination paperwork, each document a small victory in his mouth, the case closed, the problem solved, the hierarchy restored. He didn't look up when the boy burst through the doors. He didn't see what was about to happen. Ethan's voice cracked as he reached the desk. "Mom, they need to see these." The showbox tipped. Medals cascaded across the mahogany surface like coins from a broken slot machine, bronze star, silver star, purple heart again, each one catching the fluorescent light and throwing it back in sharp metallic fragments. They landed with the sound of a closing fist. Dr. Pierce froze mid-signature, his pen suspended an inch above paper, his face shifting through confusion to something much closer to vertigo. "Where did those come from?" His voice came out thin. "My attic," Ethan said, his jaw set with the same determination his mother carried into operating theaters. "Where Mom's been hiding for 8 years. Marcus Chen appeared in the corridor then, moving with the careful precision of a man still learning his body again, his wife steadying his elbow as they walked. He was supposed to be resting in his hospital bed, supposed to be recovering in private, but something had pulled him toward the commotion like a rope around his ribs. He saw the medals scattered across the desk and he saw the nurse standing beside her son, and his breath caught in his throat. His left arm, the one with the tattoo, the one with the call sign in block letters that had been his secret prayer through 8 years of operations, 8 years of wondering if she'd made it, his arm moved on its own toward his chest. "Valkyrie?" The word was a question and a prayer and a recognition all at once. Brooke turned. The moment their eyes locked, Marcus understood everything, the competence he'd witnessed in her vital checks, the way she moved through the ER like she'd done this 1,000 times before, the way her hands had known exactly where to cut when his heart stopped. She was the ghost story. She was the medic they'd all stopped hoping was alive. She was right there in scrubs and worn sneakers. A visiting Marine colonel had been touring the facility, reviewing the hospital's trauma protocols as part of a veterans' health initiative. He paused at the desk, picked up one of the medals, and then noticed the citation that Ethan had placed beside them, a yellow document that carried the weight of 8 years in hiding. The colonel read aloud, his voice carrying the particular resonance of someone trained to project authority, and the words hung in the hallway like a salute. For extraordinary heroism under fire in Tikrit, Captain Brooke Sullivan led a combat medical team through a 12-hour siege, performing field surgery while under direct enemy attack, sustaining 2 wound injuries while continuing to provide life-saving medical care to 7 service members, demonstrating extraordinary valor and medical expertise beyond the scope of traditional nursing protocols. Dr. Pierce's face had gone the color of antiseptic. "This is obviously fabricated," he said, the words coming out desperate now, his voice like a transmission grinding into the wrong gear. "Some kind of forgery. I'm calling security." "You're done calling anything," a Navy Rear Admiral said from across the lobby. The Admiral had been conducting a routine facility inspection, walking the corridors in dress blues that carried for stars like a weight he wore with absolute comfort. He stepped forward, saluted the row of medals with a precision that made the entire floor stop moving, and then he saluted Brooke, a formal recognition that turned every head in the vicinity. The 2 purple hearts. The silver star. The way her hands had moved during the thoracotomy, the way she'd known exactly what to do when protocols said do nothing. "Captain Sullivan," the Admiral said, his voice clear. "Welcome home." Dr. Pierce tried again. "Sir, with respect, I have documentation." "You have falsified documentation," a voice said from the elevator bay. A Pentagon liaison stepped out, a woman in a charcoal suit with the kind of posture that suggested she'd spent time around classified information and wasn't impressed by hospital hierarchies. Behind her came 2 FBI agents, their credentials moving from pocket to hand with the smooth efficiency of people who'd done this before. The liaison turned to Dr. Pierce with the expression of someone about to deliver a diagnosis he wasn't going to like. In 2015, Captain Sullivan's military records were sealed under executive order following a classified operation in Tikrit. Her identity was declassified last week under new transparency protocols. "We're here regarding your attempts to falsify her nursing credentials on her hospital file." The liaison gestured to the agents. "Captain Sullivan's service record is federal. Fabricating employment documentation against a veteran is a federal crime." One agent was already holding a laptop, scrolling through something on Dr. Pierce's computer. The deleted emails materialized on the screen like ghosts, messages to the state nursing board containing false complaints, fabricated incident reports, systematic efforts to build a case that didn't exist because the foundation was rotten. The agent looked at his partner. "Emails are time-stamped. Started the day after the thoracotomy." Dr. Pierce moved toward the door. Security was already there, their faces impassive, their bodies positioned like a wall he wasn't crossing. "Dr. Edward Pierce," the agent said, "you're under arrest for falsification of federal documents and obstruction of a federal employment investigation." The handcuffs came out, stainless steel clicking against his wrists with a sound like a final diagnosis. His white coat wrinkled as they turned his arms behind his back. And that's when the photographers from local news, tipped off by a nurse who'd been called incompetent one too many times, who'd seen colleagues humiliated by this man in grand rounds, that's when they got him walking through the lobby at 2:56 a.m. in the early morning dark. His face twisted. His mouth opened and closed without sound. The camera flashes went off like gunshots, catching his expression in freeze frames that would be viral by sunrise. By 9 a.m., the story was everywhere. Doctor arrested after firing decorated war hero nurse. By noon, the state medical board had suspended his license pending criminal proceedings. By evening, his attorney was negotiating a plea deal that surrendered his medical license permanently in exchange for no jail time. 6 months later, former colleagues spotted him teaching CPR basics at Norfolk Community College, demonstrating chest compressions on a plastic dummy to teenagers who didn't know his name. The pay was minimum wage. The classroom smelled like stale coffee and old rubber. And taped to his wall was a newspaper clipping showing Brooke Sullivan in her new white coat, promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine, her son beside her, her unit patch finally visible after 8 years in hiding. But none of that mattered on the night Brooke stood in the hospital lobby at sunset with Ethan on one side and Marcus Chen on the other. The hospital had unveiled a memorial wall honoring veteran healthcare workers. Brooke's faded unit patch, the one that had lived inside her jacket lining since Tikrit, sewn there by hands that had learned to stitch under fire, that patch was now framed and mounted behind glass. The motto caught the last light of the day like it had been waiting all these years for this moment, first in, last out. Marcus's wife held their newborn daughter, a pink bundle named Brooke in honor of the woman who'd given her father a second chance at life. Marcus touched his tattoo and said, "I always wondered if you made it home. Turns out you've been here the whole time." His voice cracked like it belonged to someone learning to feel again. The Admiral approached with a wooden case. Inside, on red velvet, was the Navy Cross, the one Brooke had received for Tikrit, the one she'd given away because she couldn't carry it without losing the lie that kept her alive. Marcus's mother had returned it with a handwritten note, "He lived because of you. You should carry this honor." Brooke took the case with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. Discipline held. The voice that emerged from her throat was steady. "I was just doing my job, then and now." The CEO announced new protocols. All veteran healthcare workers would have their service recognized. All veteran experience would be valued. Dr. Pierce's termination methods would become a case study in what never to do. The crowd dispersed like a held breath finally releasing, like a chapter closing and another beginning. Brooke walked through the ER one more time, past bed 7 where Marcus had flatlined, where her muscle memory had taken over and saved him. She whispered the names of her teammates who hadn't made it home, names that belonged to nobody but her now, carried in her chest like stones. Ethan appeared beside her in the near darkness, his presence a reminder that life had continued while she was hiding. "They'd be proud, Mom," he said. She smiled and touched the Navy Cross pinned inside her white coat, finally visible, finally claimed. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. The camera would have pulled back then, showing her silhouette against the sunset, the unit patch gleaming on the wall behind her, finally home after 8 years in the shadows. But Brooke was already moving forward, already back to work, already the person she'd been all along, no longer hiding, no longer invisible, no longer anyone's secret. The first patient in the bay needed her. If Captain Brooke Sullivan's story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your full value, or if you've watched someone carry a secret that changed everything, hit that subscribe button and join us for stories where quiet strength becomes loud justice. Comment below, have you ever been judged unfairly by a boss or authority figure, and what happened when the truth came out? Like this video and share it with someone who needs to know that heroes walk among us, sometimes in scrubs, sometimes in shadows, always in service.